In a forgotten corner of the city, Mushnik's flower shop stood as a dusty relic of a failing business, where the smell of stagnant water and disappointment hung heavy in the air. The irritable owner, Mushnik, barked orders at his invisible staff, his patience wearing thin as the neighborhood outside slowly decayed into a shadow of its former self. His primary source of frustration was Seymour, a clumsy and socially awkward clerk who seemed more skilled at destroying inventory than selling it to the few customers left. Meanwhile, across the neighborhood, a sadistic dentist named Dr. Farb was casually ordering decorations, while his latest patient suffered in the chair under his heavy hands. Mushnik answered the phone, eager for any transaction that might keep the lights on for another week, his voice taking on a desperate tone of forced professionalism. The dentist was notoriously cheap, insisting on a meager selection of greenery to brighten a room that echoed with the sounds of dental drills and muffled agony. A sudden blood-curdling scream erupted from the dentist's office, a sound so frequent that it had become merely background noise to the local residents of the slums. Back at the shop, Mushnik paused, hearing the chaos over the line but choosing to focus solely on the potential profit from two small gladiolus and a fern. Dr. Farb ignored the pleas of his patient, his mind already on the next extraction while he haggled over the price of a few stems of wilted flowers. Mushnik sneered at the meager order, realizing that even the professional class in this area was scraping the bottom of the barrel just to maintain appearances. With a heavy sigh of resignation, he accepted the order, knowing that beggars cannot be choosers in a business environment that was rapidly turning into a graveyard. He planned to send Seymour on the delivery, a task that would hopefully keep the boy out of the shop and away from the more delicate floral arrangements. The dentist looked forward to the delivery, seeing it as a minor distraction from his true passion, exploring the limits of human pain threshold under the guise of science. He loomed over his patient with a menacing grin, his eyes wide with a manic energy that suggested his medical degree was merely a license for sanctioned torture. As the drill whirred to life once more, the patient's world narrowed down to the cold steel in their mouth and the indifferent stare of the man holding the tool. Back at Mushnik's, the owner screamed for Seymour, his voice cracking with the strain of holding back a tide of financial ruin and personal annoyance. Seymour emerged from the back room like a whirlwind of incompetence, tripping over a bucket and sending a cascade of water and flowers across the floor. The boy stood there, dripping wet and looking completely overwhelmed, while Mushnik watched with a level of sarcasm that had long since evolved into pure despair. Mushnik handed over the flowers with instructions so simple that even Seymour should have been able to follow them, yet the air was thick with the threat of failure. With a rough shove, he sent the boy on his way, hoping that the short walk to the dentist's office wouldn't result in a total floral catastrophe. A new character, a man named Fauch, entered the shop, his presence bringing a strange energy that seemed at odds with the gloom of the establishment. He began browsing the limited selection, accompanied by Audrey, the shop's only other employee and the object of Seymour's secret, hopeless affection. Fauch wasn't interested in the typical orchids or roses that symbolized romance. He was looking for something more substantial, more practical, and perhaps more edible. As Audrey and Mrs. Shiva discussed the tragedies of their neighbors, the atmosphere in the shop became a strange blend of floral beauty and human suffering. Seymour, returning from his errand, immediately found himself back in the middle of a heated argument with Mushnik over a series of ruined carnations. The tension was broken by a bizarre sight. Fauch had picked up a carnation and began to chew on it with the casual nonchalance of a man eating a salad. He lectured Mushnik on the nutritional value of flowers, arguing that their beauty was merely a secondary benefit to their potential as a source of sustenance. Mrs. Shiva looked on in horror, her traditional values clashing violently with the sight of a man treating her favorite blooms like a common piece of celery. But the strangeness of the customer was quickly eclipsed by Mushnik's growing rage towards Seymour, whose latest mistake was the final straw in a long line of errors. He unleashed a torrent of abuse, threatening to cast the boy out into the cold streets where he belonged, far away from the fragile world of botany. Seymour stood stunned, the word fired ringing in his ears like a death knell, while Mushnik reveled in the power of finally cutting the dead weight from his shop. Audrey tried to intervene, her voice a soft plea for mercy in a room filled with harsh judgments and broken dreams, but Mushnik was beyond listening. He recited a list of Seymour's past failures, from sending funeral cards to hospitals, to nearly burning down the storefront, painting a picture of total incompetence. Fauch watched the drama unfold with a detached curiosity, his presence acting as a silent witness to the destruction of a young man's already fragile livelihood. Desperate, Seymour claimed that he loved the flowers almost as much as he loved Audrey, a confession that only seemed to make him look more pathetic in Mushnik's eyes. The dismissal was final. Mushnik was a man of business, and business had no room for clumsy romantics, who couldn't tell a rose from a weed without breaking it. But Seymour had a secret weapon. A mysterious and unique plant he had been cultivating in private. A surprise that he hoped would save his position. Mushnik was skeptical, his years in the trade telling him that there were no miracles left in the world, especially not in a shop as cursed as his own. The argument continued, as they moved through the shop, the shadows lengthening as the day began to fade into a night filled with uncertainty and strange botanical possibilities. Seymour described the plant's origins with a dramatic flair, weaving a tale of exotic seeds and ancient legends that sounded more like a fever dream than a reality. Even the old woman in the shop was drawn into the story, her own family history somehow intertwining with the dark narratives Seymour was spinning. Mushnik gave him one last chance, bring the plant to the shop, and if it was as impressive as he claimed, he might just find a way to keep his job. With a warning ringing in his ears, Seymour promised to return with the botanical wonder, his eyes shining with a mixture of hope and hidden terror. He rushed out of the store, nearly knocking himself unconscious on the doorframe, a fitting exit for a man whose life was a series of narrow escapes and accidental disasters. Back at his cluttered apartment, Seymour navigated a maze of junk and half-finished projects, his mind racing with the weight of his final opportunity. His mother, a woman who had made an art form out of hypochondria, called out from the darkness, her voice a constant reminder of the burdens he carried. He reassured her while stumbling over the furniture, his movements a frantic dance of a man trying to serve too many masters in a house built on guilt. He entered her bedroom, a place that smelled of medicine and old lace, where his mother lay waiting to trap him in her web of self-pity and imaginary ailments. She demanded attention for her tongue, her throat, and her soul, ignoring his own crisis in favor of her daily ritual of suffering and medical obsession. When he told her the doctor found nothing wrong, she erupted in indignation, convinced that the entire medical establishment was part of a conspiracy to see her dead. She felt for a goiter that wasn't there, her fingers tracing the outlines of her own fear, while Seymour looked on with the weary eyes of a man who had seen this play 1,000 times. Another accident occurred as he tried to approach her bed, a crash of broken glass that seemed to serve as the percussion for their dysfunctional lives. But he had brought her a gift, a bottle of liquid that promised relief, though its true nature was more about sedation than cure. She read the label with a growing sense of glee, her eyes lighting up at the high alcohol content that would soon turn her complaints into a drunken song. As she drank, Seymour turned his attention to the mysterious plant, its strange, pod-like shape looking more ominous in the dim light of the kitchen. He had to leave again, driven by the fear of Mushnik's wrath, while his mother began to sing with a voice that was both tragic and absurd in its newfound joy. He looked at the plant, which he called Audrey Jr., and whispered to it, hoping for a sign of life that wouldn't lead to his own destruction. His mother's advice was simple. Throw it in the trash. For it was nothing but a rotten vegetable that had no place in a house of respectable illness. She sent him out for a newspaper, her mind already on the next medical competition, her existence a cycle of diagnosis and desire for a prize she could never win. He left her singing to the empty walls, a lonely figure in a doorway that led to nowhere, her voice trailing off as he disappeared into the city streets. The city moved around him with a frantic pace, a world of concrete and steel that had no room for a man carrying a plant that shouldn't exist. He arrived at the shop, the plant held like a sacred relic, ready to be presented to the man who held his future in his hands. They gathered around the table, the small strange object drawing their eyes like a magnet, its alien beauty causing a moment of stunned silence. Seymour explained that he bought the seeds from a Japanese gardener, a detail that added a layer of exotic mystery to the plant's already strange appearance. Mushnik was still unimpressed, his cynicism a shield against the hope that this little pot could actually change their fortunes. When he heard the name Audrey Jr., the real Audrey was moved to tears, a gesture of romantic desperation that finally gained Seymour a moment of genuine affection. But Mushnik's mind was on the taxes and the mounting bills, his fear of prison outweighing any appreciation for Seymour's botanical creativity. Fauch gave him a final word of encouragement, suggesting that if the plant could be made healthy, it might attract the entire world to their door. Audrey and Seymour shared a moment of quiet hope, their eyes meeting over the tiny sprout that represented everything they wanted, and everything they feared. Mushnik issued a final decree, keep the plant alive, or they would both be out on the street. His mercy extended only as far as the plant's health allowed. In the soft light of the shop, Audrey comforted Seymour, her kindness a balm for his bruised ego, and his constant state of anxiety. He confessed his failures to keep it healthy despite all his efforts, his scientific methods failing against the plant's stubborn refusal to thrive on standard fertilizers. She left him alone in the darkness, a solitary figure among the silent flowers, his only company the mysterious Audrey Jr. He pleaded with the plant, his voice a whisper of desperation as he adjusted the soil and the light, searching for the secret of its life. Then, a moment of sharp pain changed everything. A drop of blood fell from his finger onto the leaves, and the plant responded with a terrifying, subtle movement. The next morning, the shop had transformed. A sign in the window announced the presence of a strange new plant that was already drawing curious looks from the street. Audrey was ecstatic, Mushnik was proud, and Seymour was terrified, his bandaged finger a secret witness to the cost of their newfound success. The plant had grown exponentially. Its size and vibrancy, a testament to the dark nourishment it had received during the night. The first customers arrived, 3 schoolgirls drawn by the mystery, their presence a sign that Fauch's prediction was finally coming true. They marveled at the plant's appearance, asking questions that Seymour and Audrey struggled to answer without revealing the true nature of their discovery. When they mentioned a budget of $2,000, Mushnik's world shifted. He saw a future filled with wealth and escape from the slums he loathed. He hailed Seymour as a genius, his previous anger forgotten in the glow of a massive potential sale that would change everything. He even offered to let Seymour call him Papa, an embrace of kinship that was built entirely on the foundation of the plant's inexplicable growth. They walked through the shop together, Mushnik weaving a grand tapestry of a future where they were kings of the floral industry, far away from the poverty of their past. He dreamed of giant greenhouses and Beverly Hills storefronts, his imagination fueled by the sight of the strange, hungry plant in the corner. Audrey joined the fantasy, imagining an orchestra playing Mendelssohn while they sold carnations for outrageous prices to the wealthy elite. But reality intruded in the form of Mrs. Shiva, her presence a constant reminder that life in the slums was still filled with death and unpaid bills. She inquired about the price of flowers for yet another funeral, her grief a stark contrast to the joy that had just filled the room. Mushnik, in a rare moment of genuine generosity, offered her whatever she wanted for free, his newfound hope making him feel like a titan of industry. He handed her the blooms, a kingly gesture from a man who, just yesterday, was worried about his next meal and the cost of his own survival. But the joy was short-lived. As they looked back at the plant, they saw it had wilted again, its health tied to a cycle of hunger they didn't yet understand. Mushnik's anger returned with a vengeance, his fear of failure resurfacing, as he demanded an explanation for the plant's sudden decline. He saw their future in the poorhouse, his dreams of Beverly Hills turning into a nightmare of poverty and unmarked graves in Arlington. Seymour begged for one more night, promising to nurse the plant back to health, his desperation a mirror of the plant's own secret needs. Night fell over the city, the passage of time marked by the movement of the clouds and the deepening shadows. Inside the silent flower shop, then, the unthinkable happened. The plant opened its mouth and spoke, its voice a deep reveille demand for the one thing it truly craved. Seymour was paralyzed by shock, witnessing a miracle that defied every law of nature and every lesson he had ever learned about the world. He tried to reason with it, but the plant's hunger was absolute, its roar for food echoing through the empty shop and deep into Seymour's soul. The plant's demand was simple and terrifying. "Feed me," it bellowed. Its gaping maw a gateway to a horror Seymour could no longer ignore. In a moment of self-sacrificing madness, Seymour used a needle to draw more blood from his own finger, his body already weakened by the plant's demands. He complained of his anemia, but the plant didn't care for his health. It only cared for the warm, red life that he was providing one drop at a time. He realized he couldn't go on like this. His own blood was not enough to satisfy the growing appetite of the monster he had created in his own image. He fled into the night, a broken man wandering through the industrial wasteland, his mind a whirlwind of fear and the memory of that gravelly voice. He moved through the shadows of the funeral home and the train tracks, a phantom in a world of decay, looking for an escape that didn't exist. He returned to the shop, exhausted and shivering, only to find that the plant was still there, still waiting, and still very, very hungry. As the plant demanded more, Seymour's mind finally snapped, and he confessed to the darkness that he had done the unthinkable. He had committed murder. He sat among the flowers, his face a mask of horror, recounting the act of dragging a heavy bag through the streets like a character in a gothic tragedy. The plant, Audrey Jr., responded with mechanical simplicity. Its only concern the food that Seymour had brought back from the shadows. With a heavy heart and a soul stained by the night's events, Seymour prepared to fulfill his part of the bargain, one piece at a time. He reached into the bag, his hands trembling as he pulled out the grisly evidence of his crime and offered it to the silent, waiting botanical nightmare. He dropped the object into the plant's fibers, a sound of muffled impact that marked the end of his innocence and the beginning of a new darker era. The scene shifted to a nearby restaurant, where Mushnik was enjoying a rare moment of luxury, his mind blissfully unaware of the horror in his shop. He chatted with Audrey, his mood expansive and arrogant, until he realized he had left his wallet in his other suit, a classic mistake of a man out of his element. The waitress looked on with a level of suspicion that was perfectly suited to the neighborhood, her eyes judging Mushnik for the fraud she believed him to be. Mushnik tried to maintain his dignity, but his embarrassment was palpable as he realized he was trapped in a situation he couldn't easily escape with words. She stood her ground, a tower of working-class defiance, waiting for the punchline to a joke she had already heard too many times in this city. Mushnik argued that he was a man of means, a business owner with a cash register full of money, unaware that his wealth was built on a foundation of blood. The waitress wasn't interested in his stories. She wanted the cash. And she wanted it now. Her patience as thin as the soup she had served. She issued an ultimatum. One of them stays, and the other goes to get the money. A hostage situation that seemed perfectly normal in the world they inhabited. Audrey looked on with concern, her evening of romance turning into a mundane struggle for dignity and the price of a dinner they couldn't afford. The waitress's stare was cold and unwavering, a human embodiment of the uncompromising reality that governed their lives outside the flower shop. Mushnik was outraged, his pride wounded by the idea that he was being treated like a common criminal in an establishment he believed to be high class. The deal was set, and Mushnik rose to leave, his walk a mixture of indignation and the frantic need to find the money before his reputation was ruined. He bid a hasty farewell to Audrey, leaving her alone at the table, a silent witness to his retreat into the night. He disappeared into the shadows of the city, his mind racing with the need to reach the shop and the cash register that held his only hope of return. He moved through the night like a man pursued by demons, his footsteps echoing against the brick walls of the neighborhood. Inside the shop, Seymour continued his dark work, the plant responding with a low, satisfied hum as it consumed the latest offering of human flesh. Mushnik arrived and looked through the window, his eyes widening in total terror as he witnessed the impossible scene unfolding in the center of his own store. The plant was singing, its voice a haunting, nonsensical melody that accompanied the grotesque spectacle of Seymour feeding the monster. The owner's face was a mask of pure horror, his world collapsing as he realized that his assistant was a murderer and his plant was a cannibal. He clawed at the window, desperate to see more and yet desperate to look away, his mind unable to process the sheer depravity of what he was seeing. He returned to the restaurant, his spirit broken and his mind shattered, demanding alcohol to drown the memory of the shop's dark secrets. He screamed for every type of liquor he could think of, his voice a frantic plea for oblivion in the face of a truth he couldn't survive. The waitress only cared about the money, her indifference a sharp blade that cut through his panic and his drunken despair. He threw the money at her. A gesture of total surrender. His only desire now to escape the reality of the world he had created. He sat back at the table with Audrey, but he was no longer the same man. The secret of the plant was a weight he could never share with anyone else. Audrey looked at him with concern, sensing that something had died inside him during his short walk to the shop and back. He rubbed his temples as if he could physically push the memory out of his mind, but the image of Seymour and the plant was etched into his brain forever. She offered to help, her kindness a cruel reminder of the innocence that he had lost and that Seymour had already discarded. He rejected her offer, knowing that some burdens are too heavy for two and that the truth of the plant would only destroy her too. He took a bite of food, but it tasted of ashes and blood, the mundane act of eating now tainted by the memory of the plant's own dinner. She begged him to speak, to tell her what he saw, but the words wouldn't come, frozen by the fear of what the plant might do if its secret was revealed. Finally, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would call the police and end the nightmare once and for all, no matter the cost to himself or his business. The next day, Mushnik walked through the city with the weight of the world on his shoulders, his decision to go to the police hanging by a thread. But a crowd had gathered at the shop, their excitement a barrier to his intentions, their desire for the plant a wall he couldn't climb over. The plant had grown even larger, a towering presence of green and shadow that seemed to dominate the very air of the store. Audrey told him the news. The plant had been chosen as the center of a grand floral display, a triumph that would make them famous and rich. Seymour arrived, hiding behind a mask of physical pain to avoid the questions and the judging eyes of the men who knew his secret. Mushnik cornered him, his anger a cold fire that demanded the truth about the plant and the source of its miraculous, terrifying growth. He pushed the boy into the back room, far from the prying eyes of the crowd, to finally confront the demon that had taken over his life. He demanded a confession, his voice low and dangerous, while Seymour tried to hide behind a facade of innocence and a toothache that didn't exist. He pointed at the plant as if it were a witness to the crime, its presence a constant reminder of the blood that had been shed to keep it alive. Seymour tried to play it off as a biological wonder, a hybrid of nature that followed its own rules of evolution and hunger. Mushnik wasn't buying it. He saw the growth for what it was, a physical manifestation of Seymour's crimes and the plant's insatiable desire. But the money was real, the sales were soaring, and the shop was finally successful, a fact that blurred the lines of Mushnik's morality. He wanted to know what the plant was, but Seymour's answers were vague and filled with the technical jargon of a man trying to hide the truth. He described it as a hybrid of a Venus flytrap, a description that was both technically accurate and deeply misleading about its true nature. Mushnik wondered about its habits, his mind already calculating the cost of its care and the potential danger it posed to everyone in the room. Seymour explained that it only needed to eat a few times to reach its full size, a biological limit that Mushnik hoped was finally reached. The owner's doubt was heavy, his suspicion a shadow that followed every word Seymour spoke about the plant's mysterious appetite. They moved through the shop, their argument a low hum of tension in a room that was now filled with the possibility of total ruin or total success. Seymour tried to reassure him that the feeding was over, that the plant would grow no more and its hunger was finally satiated for good. Mushnik hoped he was right, for the alternative was a horror that he could no longer bear to think about, let alone live with every day. The toothache returned, a physical manifestation of Seymour's internal struggle, and Mushnik finally sent him away to the only person who could help. The boy left for the dentist, leaving Mushnik alone with the shop and the mounting orders that were both a blessing and a curse. A customer burst in with demands for more flowers, her excitement a sharp contrast to the silent, watching presence of the plant in the corner. Seymour walked through the streets, his hand to his jaw, a solitary figure in a city that was slowly closing in on him from all sides. He waited in the dentist's office, the sounds of suffering from the next room a grim reminder of the cruelty that existed in the world. A bloody patient escaped the office, pursued by a doctor whose idea of medicine was closer to an act of war than a form of healing. The doctor recognized Seymour, his mocking tone a sign that he knew the boy's weakness and intended to exploit it for his own dark amusement. He dragged Seymour into the chair, the room a battlefield of dental equipment, and the lingering smell of fear and antiseptic. Seymour tried to defend himself with a light fixture, his terror a physical thing that filled the room as the doctor loomed over him with a drill. The struggle was brief. The doctor's power was absolute in this room of sanctioned pain, and Seymour was soon strapped down and at his mercy. He examined the boy's teeth with a brutal efficiency, his comments about the decay a reflection of his own warped view of the world. He prepared his tools with a manic glee, his eyes wide with the excitement of a man who truly loved the sounds of a patient's muffled screams. The drilling began, a high-pitched whine that seemed to tear through the very fabric of Seymour's consciousness as he suffered in silence. The doctor found the decay and marveled at its severity, his medical fascination a thin veil for the pure sadism that drove his every action. He taunted the boy as he worked, his laughter a cruel accompaniment to the rhythmic movement of the drill against the tooth. In a moment of accidental violence, the doctor swallowed his own tools, a chaotic mistake that marked the beginning of his own downfall. He continued to drill, his frenzy growing with each passing second, until the office was a whirlwind of mechanical noise and human agony. He decided to pull every tooth in Seymour's head, his medical ethics long since abandoned in favor of a total exploration of physical pain. The scene turned into a nightmare of flying teeth and high-pitched screams, a carnival of suffering that would haunt Seymour for the rest of his short life. The fire flew from the drill, a hellish light that illuminated the room as the doctor pushed deeper and deeper into the boy's suffering. Finally, the deed was done, and the doctor moved to clean up the mess, his lack of an assistant a testament to his own isolation in his cruelty. He prepared a filling with a casual nonchalance, even tasting the chemicals himself as if they were nothing more than a kitchen recipe. He returned to Seymour, but the boy had reached his limit. The victim was finally ready to become the victimizer in a desperate act of survival. A sword fight erupted in the office, a surreal battle of dental equipment that reflected the madness of the situation and the desperation of the characters. A new character, Wilberforce, watched from the shadows, his face a mask of strange satisfaction at the violence unfolding before him. He waited in the lobby, reading a magazine about pain, his own internal world, a mirror of the suffering that was being inflicted in the next room. Seymour, now dressed as the doctor, met him with a face full of tears and a mind that was rapidly disintegrating under the pressure of his secrets. Wilbur introduced himself with a bizarre level of enthusiasm, his desire for dental pain a clear sign that he was the perfect patient for this house of horrors. Seymour tried to send him away, his own guilt and trauma making it impossible for him to continue the charade of being a professional healer. But Wilbur insisted. His teeth were a disaster of abscesses and decay, and he craved the pain that only a man like Seymour could now provide. He reveled in the descriptions of medical suffering, his laughter a terrifying sound in the silent office as he waited for his turn in the chair. The time had come. Seymour summoned him into the room, a summoner leading a willing victim to the altar of their mutual botanical nightmare. Wilbur spoke of the beauty of the work, the feeling of the drill in the tooth as a form of progress and personal growth that he couldn't find elsewhere. He prepared for the procedure with a sense of anticipation that was both tragic and grotesque, while Seymour looked on with the eyes of a dead man. He rejected the anesthesia, wanting to feel every second of the pain as it moved through his body and into his very soul. The procedure was a shared experience of agony, a masochistic dance between two men who had long since abandoned the rules of the normal world. Wilbur screamed in delight as the drill did its work, his pain a form of ecstasy that Seymour couldn't understand, but was forced to participate in. Finally, the session was over, and Seymour looked at his patient with a sense of confusion and a growing realization of the darkness he had unleashed. Wilbur left with a smile, promising to return and recommend his friends, a final, ironic twist in a day that was already filled with too many horrors. He walked out into the world, a man transformed by his own suffering, leaving Seymour alone in the office to deal with the consequences of his actions. The missing dentist's fate was sealed as the Huaji music marked a transition into the next phase of the botanical nightmare. Seymour returned to the shop under the cover of darkness, carrying a heavy burden that would soon be the plant's next meal. He dragged the body into the plant's awaiting leaves. The sound of movement a silent witness to the finality of the act he was committing. The plant responded with a satisfied burp. A sound of total satiation that marked the end of another cycle of hunger and blood. The detectives began their investigation, their mundane office a stark contrast to the extraordinary horrors that were taking place in the flower shop. They discussed the missing persons cases with a level of detachment that suggested they had seen too much of the world's dark side to be truly surprised. The disappearance of a detective was a serious matter, a blow to the department that demanded an immediate and thorough response. Blood on the tracks was their only clue, a physical manifestation of a mystery that seemed to lead directly into the heart of the slums. The missing dentist was the next piece of the puzzle, his office a crime scene that whispered of violence and a struggle for survival. They prepared to investigate the shop, unaware that they were stepping into a web of botanical horror that no police training could have prepared them for. They walked through the streets with a sense of purpose, their presence a threat to the secret that Seymour and Mushnick were so desperately trying to hide. Inside the shop, Audrey was amazed by the plant's growth, her innocent joy a tragic contrast to the dark reality of how that growth was achieved. She shared a moment of affection with Seymour, their kiss a brief island of tenderness in a sea of blood and growing botanical nightmare. Mushnick watched from the shadows, his eyes filled with suspicion and the knowledge of what had truly happened during the night. He interrupted their romance with a sharp comment about the plant, his own internal struggle making it impossible for him to tolerate their happiness. The shop was now a hub of activity, the crowd outside a sign that the secret was about to be revealed to the entire world. The detective arrived and began to look around, his trained eyes searching for anything that might explain the disappearances and the strange plant. Mrs. Shiva returned with more news of death, her presence a constant reminder that the plant's hunger was being matched by the neighborhood's own mortality. The detective questioned Mushnick, presenting evidence that seemed to point directly to the shop and the people inside it. Mushnick's fear was palpable, his sweat and his frantic denials a clear sign that he was hiding a truth that would destroy everything he worked for. The investigation continued as the police demanded cooperation, unaware that the real criminal was a plant that sat just a few feet away from them. Mushnick turned his rage towards Seymour once more, his desire for a normal life clashing with the reality of the monster they were sheltering. They argued about the plant's hunger, with Seymour admitting that it had already eaten 3 times, a number that sounded like a death sentence to Mushnick. Audrey arrived to break the tension, her presence a reminder of the love that Seymour was still trying to protect even as he fell deeper into the darkness. They planned a date, a desperate attempt at normalcy in a world that was rapidly turning into a botanical nightmare of their own making. He suggested a dinner at his house, a place where his mother could finally meet the girl he loved, and perhaps provide a sense of family that he so desperately needed. A wealthy woman arrived to praise the plant, her admiration a cruel irony, given the price that had been paid to create the botanical wonder she saw. She announced that Seymour had won a trophy, a symbol of success that felt like a mockery to a man whose hands were stained with blood and dirt. She wanted to know when the plant would bloom, unaware that the blossoming would be a revelation of the horror that lay at its heart. The crowd cheered, their joy a deafening sound in a room that was filled with the silent screams of the plant's victims and the fear of its creators. Seymour brought Audrey home to his mother, but the house was still a place of illness and complaint, a world where the plant's hunger was matched by his mother's own needs. They sat for dinner, but the atmosphere was thick with the unresolved tension of Seymour's secret and his mother's refusal to let him go. Mushnick stayed behind at the shop, a lonely sentinel guarding a secret that he knew would eventually consume him and everyone he loved. Back at dinner, the mother toasted to a future that didn't exist, her alcohol fueled joy a tragic contrast to the darkness that was closing in on them. Mushnik was awakened by the voice of the plant, its demand for food now a terrifying reality that he could no longer ignore even in his dreams. He tried to deny the sound, but the plant's hunger was too powerful, its voice a deep, gravelly command that echoed through the empty shop. The monster asked him who he wanted to eat tonight, a terrifying question that suggested the plant was now in control of their mutual fate. Mushnik was outraged, his sense of authority challenged by a biological nightmare that spoke with a human voice and hungered for human flesh. He barked back at the plant, but his words were empty, his power as a business owner, meaningless in the face of a force of nature that followed its own rules. The plant's hunger was absolute, its cry for food a primal sound that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the flower shop and into the night. He mocked the monster, suggesting it eat the entire neighborhood, a bitter joke that contained a terrifying kernel of truth about the plant's potential. He prepared to leave, but the plant's warning followed him into the darkness, a promise of retribution that would soon come to pass in a way he never expected. He bid it a cold goodnight, but the shadows in the shop seemed to stretch toward him, their touch a silent reminder of the bargain he had made with the darkness. The monster's final word was a threat, a prediction of doom that would be fulfilled before the sun rose over the decaying city streets. The scene shifted violently back to the dinner table, the transition marked by a jarring discord in the music and a change in the light that signaled a new level of danger. The mother continued her monologue about Chinese herbs and medical nonsense, her voice a grating soundtrack to a dinner that was already falling apart under the weight of Seymour's guilt. They discussed marriage, but the word felt hollow in a house that was built on illness and a life that was now tied to a carnivorous plant in a failing flower shop. Mushnik back at the shop tried to eat his own dinner, but the taste was bitter and the silence was filled with the imaginary sounds of the plant's gravelly voice. The silence was broken by a robber, a clumsy intruder whose presence would provide a sudden and horrific solution to the plant's insatiable hunger. Seymour confronted him with a gun, his hands shaking as he faced a man who was just as desperate and just as doomed as he was himself. The robber demanded money, but Mushnik saw an opportunity to satisfy the monster and save his own life at the same time, a calculated act of total depravity. He told the man the money was inside the plant, a lie that would lead him directly into the jaws of the botanical nightmare, waiting in the corner of the shop. The robber counted down, his threats a countdown to his own horrific end, as Mushnik watched with a level of cold calculation that was almost inhuman. He pushed the man toward the plant, his words a siren song that led the intruder deeper and deeper into the shadows, where the monster was waiting to strike. The robber leaned in searching for the cash, unaware that he was about to become the latest piece of evidence in the plant's horrific growth and the shop's bloody success. With a final, cynical comment, Mushnik watched as the plant took its latest victim, a sound of muffled impact marking the end of the struggle and the beginning of a new day. The next morning arrived with a sense of dread as Mushnik and Seymour faced each other in the shop, their mutual secret a war that they could no longer see over. Mushnik decided to end it. Tonight they would finish the ceremony, and tomorrow they would destroy the plant and everything it represented, once and for all. Audrey and Seymour shared a moment of quiet hope, unaware that the final act of their tragedy was about to unfold in a burst of botanical horror and human sacrifice. They planned a picnic, a simple dream of escape that felt like a fantasy in a world that was rapidly turning into a nightmare of their own making. Mushnik's voice followed Seymour even in his dreams, a haunting reminder of the orders and the botanical demands that were now the only reality he knew. He returned home to his mother, but the air was still thick with her complaints and the looming threat of the plant's insatiable hunger for more blood and flesh. She warned him about Audrey, her suspicion a dark cloud over the only source of light and love in his otherwise miserable existence in the slums. They argued about the girl's health, a conversation that was both absurd and tragic in its focus on imaginary illness, while a real monster sat waiting in the shop. She demanded he find a woman with real suffering, her view of romance built on a foundation of mutual misery and the shared obsession with medical tragedy. Seymour tried to defend his love, but his words were empty, his mind already back at the shop with the plant and the gravelly voice that demanded more food. His mother's drama reached a fever pitch, her fear of being left alone with her imaginary ailments driving her to a hysterical performance of total despair. He fell to the floor, a physical manifestation of his total exhaustion and his inability to cope with the demands of his mother and the monster he had created. He begged her to stay alive until he returned, a final, desperate promise to a woman whose only concern was her own survival in a world she believed was trying to kill her. He rushed out of the house, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her medication, a solitary figure in a doorway that led into a night filled with horror. The sun set over the city, a final moment of beauty before the botanical nightmare reached its final, horrific climax in the center of the silent flower shop. They shared a meal among the flowers, but the atmosphere was thick with the unresolved tension of their secrets and the looming threat of the monster in the corner. Seymour dreamed of a life in the South Seas, far away from the blood and the dirt, and the plant that was slowly taking over his every waking thought and dream. Audrey wanted to go with him, her love a beacon of hope in a world that was rapidly turning into a nightmare of human sacrifice and botanical hunger. He finally confessed his love, a moment of pure emotion that was both beautiful and tragic in its timing and its total honesty in the face of death. They leaned in for a kiss, but the moment was shattered by the gravelly voice of the monster, its demand for food a harsh reminder of the reality they lived in. The interruption was final. The monster's hunger would not be denied, even for a moment of human tenderness in a world that had long since forgotten its meaning. Seymour tried to lie, to hide the source of the voice, but the plant's roar was too powerful and its demands were too clear to be hidden by a clumsy ventriloquist act. Audrey's suspicion was growing, her sense of reality challenged by the strange sounds and the bizarre behavior of the man she loved more than anyone else. He made a fool of himself, his desperation to protect her from the truth leading him into a series of lies that only made him look more like a madman in her eyes. She questioned his sanity, her love turning to concern as she realized that Seymour was lost in a world of botanical nightmares that she couldn't see or understand. The plant screamed for food once more, its voice a primal command that broke the final thread of normalcy that was holding their fragile relationship together. She left him along with his monster, her departure a final, tragic abandonment that marked the end of his hope for a normal life and a future with the girl he loved. He followed her into the street, his pleas for forgiveness a silent cry in the empty night, but Audrey was already gone, lost to the shadows of the city. He tried to explain, but the words were useless against the wall of fear and disappointment that she had built between them to protect herself from his madness. His face was a mask of despair, his eyes reflecting the total loss of everything he worked for and everything he hoped to achieve through his dark deeds. He spoke of his dreams and his mother, but they were empty concepts in a world that was now governed by the rules of botanical hunger and human sacrifice. He dreamed of a trophy and fame, but they were nothing more than a pile of ashes in the face of the monster that was currently consuming his soul from the inside out. The girl he loved didn't care about his fame, she only cared about the man he used to be, before the plant and the blood and the secrets took him over. She left him for good, her goodbye a final, tragic note in a song that was already filled with too many discords, and too much suffering for anyone to survive. He watched her go, a lonely figure in the night, his world now reduced to the silent, watching presence of the botanical nightmare in the corner of the shop. His misery was complete, his life a series of choices that had led him directly into the jaws of a monster he couldn't kill and the truth he couldn't survive. He returned to the shop to face his creation, his anger a cold fire that he unleashed on the silent, waiting botanical nightmare that had destroyed his life. He accused it of making him a butcher and driving his girl away, his voice a rasping sound of total defeat in a room that smelled of death and rotting vegetation. The plant roared back, its demand for food a final, ironic command that marked the end of Seymour's resistance and the beginning of his final sacrifice. He surrendered to the darkness, his spirit broken, and his mind shattered, ready to fulfill his final role in the tragedy he had so carefully cultivated for months. The plant's gravelly voice called out his name, a siren song that led him deeper and deeper into the shadows of the shop and the jaws of the waiting monster. It demanded more. Its hunger as insatiable as the city itself, its voice a constant reminder of the price that had to be paid for its miraculous, terrifying growth. He walked toward the door, a man already dead in every way that mattered, ready to find the final meal for the creature that had taken everything he ever loved. He disappeared into the night, a phantom in a world of shadows, searching for the one thing that would finally end the cycle of hunger and blood in the shop. The scene shifted to a new victim, a woman in the night whose presence would mark the final act of the botanical nightmare and the end of Seymour's dark journey. He found her in the darkness, a solitary figure whose existence would be the final price paid for the plant's blossoming and the shop's horrific success. He ran through the streets, his footsteps a rhythmic sound of doom that echoed against the brick walls of the city and into the heart of the slums he loathed. They sat on a bench, a final moment of mundane conversation before the horror began, their lives intersecting for a few brief seconds of tragic irony. She showed him her beauty, but he only saw the meat that would satisfy his master. His view of humanity now, totally distorted by the plant's insatiable hunger. He picked up a stone, a primitive tool of violence for a man whose life had been reduced to the base instincts of a predator and a servant to a monster. She looked at him with expectation, her eyes reflecting the hope that he might be the one to save her from the loneliness of her own life in the city. But he only saw the sacrifice, his face a mask of total terror and total resolve as he prepared to strike the final blow and end the cycle once and for all. The city moved on, unaware that the mystery was reaching its climax in a burst of botanical horror and human sacrifice that no one would ever truly survive. The investigation reached its high point, as the police closed in on the shop, their presence a threat to the secret that Seymour and Mushnick were so desperately trying to hide. The crowd gathered for the ceremony, their excitement a deafening sound in a room that was filled with the silent screams of the plant's victims and the fear of its creators. Mushnick tried to maintain order, but his authority was gone, his life now governed by the rules of the monster that sat in the center of his store. He realized that the end was near, his desire for a normal life finally crushed by the weight of the botanical nightmare he had so carefully sheltered for months. The trophy arrived, a symbol of success that felt like a mockery to a man whose hands were stained with blood and whose soul was tied to a carnivorous plant. Seymour and Audrey shared a final, tragic look, their love a broken thing in a world that was rapidly turning into a nightmare of human sacrifice and botanical hunger. The detectives watched and waited, their presence a silent threat to the truth that was about to be revealed to the entire world in a burst of botanical horror. Mrs. Shiva's presence was a final, tragic note in a song that was already filled with too many discords and too much suffering for anyone to truly survive. The sun went down, and the blossoming began, a revelation of the horror that had been growing in the center of the shop for months under their very noses. The plant opened its petals, and the faces of the missing persons were revealed, a grotesque spectacle that marked the final act of the botanical nightmare. The crowd's joy turned to horror as they realized the truth, their admiration for the plant becoming a scream of terror in the face of its bloody secret. Audrey and Seymour were caught in the middle of the chaos, their lives finally intersecting with the horror they had so desperately tried to hide from each other. The faces in the flowers were a final, tragic testimony to the price that had been paid to create the botanical wonder that the world had so admired for weeks. The pursuit began as Seymour fled into the night, pursued by the police and the memory of the botanical nightmare that had finally consumed everything he ever loved. He ran through the empty streets, a phantom in a world of shadows, his footsteps a rhythmic sound of doom that echoed against the brick walls of the city. The detectives were close behind, their training and their weapons a final, ironic solution to a problem that no police officer could have ever truly understood. Seymour returned to the shop for the final act, his spirit broken and his mind shattered, ready to fulfill his role in the tragedy he had so carefully cultivated.